A number you've probably never heard just broke a world record, and it means one of the world's richest, most advanced countries is quietly running out of people. Not through war or disaster, but through arithmetic. Three numbers tell the entire story, and once you see them, you can't unsee them. 0.72, 0.55, and 2.1. Let's follow each one and watch a nation begin to disappear, told entirely in data. Start with the first number, 0.72. The average number of children a South Korean woman is expected to have in her lifetime, measured in 2023. For almost all of human history, that figure sat between 4 and 7. Today, in Korea, it is below 1. It is the lowest national fertility rate ever recorded, not just in Asia, but anywhere on Earth, in the whole of recorded history. A genuine world record, and not one any country wants. To understand why that's so alarming, you need the second number, 2.1. That is roughly how many children each woman must have, on average, for a population to simply replace itself from one generation to the next. South Korea is at 0.72, barely a third of what's needed. So with each new generation, the number of Koreans being born is set to shrink by almost 2/3. And because each smaller generation then has fewer children in turn, the decline compounds. Now zoom all the way out to the entire planet. Put every country on a single map, shaded by its birth rate, and a striking pattern appears. Much of Africa still has large families, shaded bright. Across East Asia and Europe, the colors fade as birth rates fall below replacement. And then there is a single darkest point on the whole map, the lowest of them all, on a peninsula in the far east of Asia. That country is South Korea. The third number is the most unsettling, because 0.72 is itself just a national average, and some places are far below it. In Seoul, the capital, home to a huge share of the country's people and the engine of its economy, the birth rate isn't 0.72. It is 0.55. The richest, most educated, most connected city in the country is also the one having the fewest children. Wherever opportunity is highest, births are lowest. And here is why demographers around the world are watching Korea so closely. No society in modern history has ever fallen this far below replacement and then climbed back. Once a population starts shrinking at this speed, the decline builds its own momentum. Fewer children today means fewer parents tomorrow, which means fewer children still. It is one of the hardest trends in all of economics to reverse. But it was not always like this. Rewind to 1960, and the average Korean woman had about 6 children. Then, decade by decade, the line began to fall, pushed down by rising incomes, mass education, and the move into crowded, expensive cities. It crossed below the replacement line around 1983, and in 2018, it broke a barrier no major economy had ever crossed. It fell below 1 single child per woman, from 6 to under 1, inside a single human lifetime. So how does Korea compare to everyone else right now? Rank the world's major economies by birth rate, and South Korea sits at the very bottom of the list. It is below China, which spent decades actively limiting births. Below Italy and Spain, long famous for their aging towns. It is even below Japan, the nation the whole world pictures when it imagines a shrinking, graying society. By this one measure, South Korea is the hardest place on the planet to sustain a population. Let's stay on Japan, because it overturns what almost everyone assumes. For 30 years, Japan has been the global symbol of demographic decline, the aging villages, the shrinking workforce. And yet Japan's birth rate, at just over 1, is now clearly higher than Korea's 0.7. Korea didn't just end up lower than its old teacher. It got there faster, passing each stage of aging in fewer years. The student has overtaken the master, and Korea is still falling, while Japan's decline has been far more gradual. So why is this happening? There is no single villain, but surveys of Korean adults point to the same pressures again and again. Housing is among the most expensive in the world relative to income, so young couples delay or abandon the idea of a family home. Working hours are long, and the cost of educating each child, especially private tutoring, is enormous. The data shows these pressures clearly. Their exact weight is still debated. But the pattern is unmistakable. Where the cost of children climbs highest, birth rates fall furthest. But the birth rate is only half of this story. The other half is what happens at the far end of life. And here, the speed is breathtaking. Demographers use 3 thresholds, based on the share of people aged 65 and over. A society is aging at 7%, aged at 14%, and superaged at 20%. South Korea crossed those 3 lines in 2000, 2017, and 2024. Watch how little time separates them, because that shrinking gap is where the real shock lives. Here is the comparison that makes demographers stop in their tracks. The leap from an aged society to a superaged one, from 14% over 65 up to 20, took Japan about 11 years, and Europe as a whole closer to 19. South Korea did it in roughly 7. No major society in recorded history has ever aged this quickly. It is not just that Korea is growing old. It is growing old faster than any nation before it, with almost no time to prepare. And that final milestone has just arrived. In December of 2024, South Korea officially became a superage society. More than 10 million of its citizens, over 20% of the population, are now aged 65 or older. That is 1 in every 5 Koreans. And this is not a peak, it is only a waypoint. The share climbs every year because the large generations born in the mid-20th century are now retiring, while the tiny generations behind them were never born in the numbers to replace them. Let's look at the country's age structure as it stands today. Picture the whole population sorted into 3 groups. A wide band of working-age adults, everyone from 15 to 64, makes up about 70% of the country. Above them sit the retirees, near 20%, and below them, the children, just over 10%. For now, that working middle is still broad and strong. Plenty of workers, supporting a smaller number of dependents. The key phrase, though, is for now. Watch what the official projections do to that structure by 2072, within the lifetime of children alive today. The working age share, around 70% now, collapses toward 46%. Meanwhile, the over 65s surge upward, from 19% to nearly 48%. The 2 groups don't just shift. They cross over completely and trade places. The retirees become the single largest group in the country, while the broad base of workers that holds the economy up narrows until it's barely wider than the elderly above it. That inversion isn't just a chart. It lands as a real and growing economic weight. Economists track the old age dependency ratio, how many retirees each 100 working age adults must support through taxes, pensions, and care. In 2024, that number in Korea was about 27, roughly 4 workers for every retiree. But follow the projection forward, and the line climbs relentlessly, past 40, past 60 by the early 2040s, and by 2072, it is projected to pass 100. Stop and really absorb what that number means. More than 100 retirees for every 100 working-age adults. For the first time in the country's history, there would be more people drawing on the economy through pensions, healthcare, and elderly care than there are working-age people to produce the goods and pay the taxes that fund it. The entire arithmetic of a modern welfare state assumes this never happens. In Korea, it is now on the official schedule. Let's translate all of this into actual human beings. South Korea's working-age population, everyone aged 15 to 64, the people who fill the jobs and pay the taxes, stood at about 36.5 million in 2023. By 2072, that group is projected to fall below 17 million. The total population shrinks too, but notice the gap between the 2 lines. The workforce falls far faster than the population as a whole because it is being hollowed out from both ends at once. Put a single figure on it. That is a 55% decline in the working-age population in under 50 years. The engine of the entire economy, the people who actually generate the country's wealth, cut roughly in half within the span of one working career. There is no peacetime precedent for an advanced economy shrinking its own workforce by that much, that fast. And nearly every other projection in this story flows from this one brutal fact. And the total population is already turning the corner. For decades it climbed, passing 50 million as Korea grew into a global economic powerhouse. Then it quietly stopped. The population peaked back in 2020 at just under 52 million, and 2020 was not a forecast or a distant warning. It was the high water mark, and it is already behind us. From that peak, every official projection points in only one direction, down, and then more steeply as the century goes on. By 2072, on the official medium projection, South Korea is expected to lose about 30% of its entire population, falling from nearly 52 million people to around 36 million. That would erase roughly half a century of population growth in a single generation and mark the first sustained decline in the nation's modern history. A country that spent the 20th century booming and rising is now set to spend much of the 21st slowly emptying out. At this point, you might assume South Korea is just a strange outlier, a special case the rest of the world can ignore. It isn't. Look at its neighbors and peers. Taiwan, Singapore, China, Spain, Italy, Japan, every single one of them now sits below the replacement line, having too few children to hold their population steady. Korea is not alone on this road at all. It is simply the country that has traveled furthest down it and arrived first. And that is what makes this story matter far beyond one peninsula. South Korea isn't a curiosity to be filed away. It is a preview. The same forces pushing its birth rate towards zero, expensive housing, long hours, the soaring cost of raising a child, are quietly at work across the entire developed world. Korea is just the first nation to reach the destination many others are slowly heading toward, which is exactly why the whole world is now watching it. So let's bring it back to where we started, to that single, record-breaking number, 0.72. Here is what it actually means in concrete terms. A working-age population set to fall by 55%, a total population set to shrink by nearly a third, and the fastest transition into a super-age society of any nation ever recorded. 3 enormous consequences, all flowing from one birth rate that simply fell too far for too long. And here is the part that is hardest to absorb. None of this is a distant forecast for the year 2100. The fertility collapse is happening right now. The super-aged milestone was already crossed in 2024, and the population peak is firmly behind us. It came and went in 2020. South Korea is not waiting for its decline to begin. It has already begun. The only real question left is who follows next and how soon.